The dusty main street of Silver Creek stretched beneath the blazing Texas sun as 24-year-old Clara Whitmore sat on the wooden steps outside the general store, her wedding dress torn and stained from her desperate flight through the desert scrubland. The delicate lace veil that had belonged to her mother now served as a shield, hiding the purple bruises around her left eye and the cut on her lip that had finally driven her to escape her arranged marriage. To the brutal rancher Silas Blackwood, Clara pulled the veil closer around her face as townspeople gathered to stare at the strange sight of a lone bride who had appeared in their remote settlement like a ghost from the prairie. She could hear their whispered speculations about who she was and why she had come to their town in such a state. But shame and fear kept her eyes fixed on the dusty ground. That's when the boots appeared in her field of vision. Well-worn leather boots that belonged to someone who had stopped directly in front of her and was waiting patiently for her to acknowledge his presence. "Ma'am," came a gentle voice that carried none of the harsh demands she had grown accustomed to. "You look like you might need some help." Clara looked up to see a man in his early 30s, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his brown eyes holding the kind of kindness she had almost forgotten existed. He wore a simple cotton shirt and brown vest, with a cowboy hat in his hands that he had removed out of respect for her distress. "I'm Daniel Harper," he said, crouching down so they could speak at eye level rather than having him tower over her. "I run the horse ranch just outside of town. Are you hurt?" The genuine concern in his voice made Clara's eyes fill with tears, but she instinctively pulled the veil tighter across her face. "I'm fine," she whispered, the lie obvious to both of them. "You're clearly not fine," Daniel said, gently but firmly. "And there's no shame in admitting when you need help. That's what neighbors are for." Behind them, Clara could see more townspeople gathering on the porches and in doorways, their curiosity mixed with the kind of judgment that small communities often passed on situations they didn't understand. The weight of their stares made her want to disappear entirely. Daniel must have sensed her discomfort because he positioned himself between Clara and the growing crowd of onlookers. "Folks, the lady needs some space and privacy. Why don't you all go about your business and let her catch her breath?" Most of the townspeople dispersed reluctantly, though a few continued to watch from a distance. Daniel turned his attention back to Clara with the patience of someone who understood that trust had to be earned. "Not demanded. Ma'am, I don't know what brought you to our town, but I can see you've been through something terrible. Would you be willing to let me help you get cleaned up and maybe find you a safe place to rest?" Clara studied Daniel's face, searching for any sign of the cruelty or ulterior motives she had learned to watch for in men. What she found instead was steady compassion, and the kind of strength that protected rather than threatened. "You don't know anything about me," she said quietly. "I could be a criminal or a madwoman or worse." "Could be," Daniel agreed with a slight smile. "But I doubt it. More likely you're someone who ran from something bad and ended up here hoping for something better." The accuracy of his assessment made Clara's carefully maintained composure finally crack. She began to sob behind her veil, all the fear and exhaustion and desperate hope of the past 3 days overwhelming her at once. Daniel waited patiently for her tears to subside, offering his clean handkerchief without trying to rush her or demand explanations. When Clara's sobs quieted to sniffles, he spoke again. "Would you mind if I asked why you're hiding behind that veil? Are you injured?" Clara nodded reluctantly, ashamed of the visible evidence of Silas Blackwood's violent temper that had finally driven her to flee in her wedding dress rather than submit to a lifetime of such treatment. "May I see?" Daniel asked gently. "I'm not asking to judge or pry. I just want to know if you need medical attention." For a long moment, Clara hesitated. Showing her injuries meant revealing the truth about her circumstances, making herself vulnerable to potential judgment or rejection. But something about Daniel's steady presence made her feel safer than she had in months. Slowly, Clara reached up and began to pull back the veil that had become both her protection and her prison. As the delicate lace fell away, she watched Daniel's face carefully for signs of disgust or rejection. What she saw instead was anger, but not directed at her. Daniel's jaw tightened as he took in the extent of her injuries. and his eyes flashed with the kind of protective fury that good men feel when confronted with evidence of cruelty toward those who couldn't defend themselves. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle and full of something Clara had never heard directed toward her before: unconditional acceptance. "You're beautiful," he said simply, as if her bruises and cuts were invisible, as if he could see past the damage to something more fundamental and lasting. Clara stared at him in amazement. "How can you say that? Look at me. I'm broken and damaged, and you're a woman who was brave enough to run from something that was hurting you," Daniel interrupted firmly. "You're a survivor who made it across dangerous country to find safety. That kind of courage is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Over the following days, Daniel helped Clara settle into a small room above the seamstress shop, where she could recover in privacy while deciding what to do next. The town doctor confirmed that while her injuries were painful, they would heal completely with time and proper care. But more than physical healing, Clara found herself slowly beginning to trust again under Daniel's patient friendship. He visited daily, bringing fresh food and updates from town, never pushing for more of her story than she was willing to share, but making it clear that her past didn't define her worth in his eyes. "Daniel," Clara said one evening as they sat on the shop's small balcony watching the sunset, "why are you helping me? You could have just pointed me toward the sheriff and gone about your business." Daniel considered the question carefully. "My mother used to say that we're all just walking each other home. Some days you're the one who needs help, other days you're the one who can offer it. Today I can help. Tomorrow maybe you'll help someone else. What if I can never repay your kindness? Clara, kindness isn't a loan that needs to be repaid. It's a gift that's meant to be passed on when you're able." As the weeks passed and Clara's physical injuries healed, she began helping the seamstress with her work, discovering a talent for intricate embroidery and detailed alterations. The work gave her both independence and a sense of purpose she had never experienced during her sheltered upbringing. More importantly, her friendship with Daniel had grown into something deeper as she came to understand that not all men use their strength to dominate and control. Daniel's strength was evident in his gentle hands with frightened horses, his patient teaching of local children who wanted to learn about ranching, and his quiet leadership in community decisions that affected everyone's well-being. "Clara," Daniel said one evening as autumn began to color the surrounding hills, "I want to ask you something, but I need you to know that whatever your answer, it won't change how I feel about you or my desire to help you build whatever life you want here." Clara felt her heart quicken, understanding that this conversation would define her future. "I'm listening. I've come to love you, not despite what you've been through, but because of who I've seen you become as you've healed and grown stronger. Would you consider marrying me, not because you need protection or security, but because we could build something good together?" Clara looked at this man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and had chosen to see beauty where others might see only damage. "Daniel, are you sure you want to marry someone with my history? Someone who fled from her wedding and arrived here like a refugee? Clara, your history is what brought you to me. Your courage in leaving a bad situation, your strength in rebuilding your life, your kindness toward others who are struggling. That's the woman I fell in love with." 6 months later, Clara Harper stood in the same spot where Daniel had first found her, but now she wore a new wedding dress she had sewn herself, and her face was radiant with joy rather than hidden by shame. The veil she wore belonged to Daniel's mother, a family heirloom that welcomed her into a legacy of women who had been valued and cherished. "You know what I learned from that first day?" Clara said to Daniel as they prepared to speak their vows in front of the supportive community that had become her chosen family. "What's that?" "That sometimes we have to run from what's hurting us before we can find what we're meant to run toward. I thought I was just escaping, but I was actually finding my way home." Daniel smiled, remembering the frightened woman who had hidden behind her veil, too ashamed to show her face to the world. "And I learned that the most beautiful thing about a person isn't what shows on the surface, but the courage they carry inside. Sometimes healing begins when someone sees past our wounds to recognize our worth. And sometimes the most important journey is the one that takes us from shame to self-acceptance, from hiding to the courage to be seen and loved exactly as we are. If this story reminded you that true beauty comes from courage and resilience rather than perfect circumstances, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to remember that their past doesn't define their worth. Subscribe for more stories about second chances and finding love after surviving difficult times, and let us know in the comments about how someone's acceptance helped you heal from a difficult experience. Sometimes the most important beauty is the kind that can only be seen by people who choose to look with compassion rather than judgment.